Hello, I am Taylor Lockwood, and this is the good, the bad, and the deadly. This is a situation that no one wants to be in. So before we have to take any unwelcome detour, we're going to take a look at the background, the basics of identification, and the groups of poisonous mushrooms, and we're going to make sure that we don't have to take a ride to the hospital. Mushrooms are good for us in many ways. They're an important part of nature, they're beautiful, they're great to eat, and they're healthy for us. But if you want to hunt them, cook them for yourself or others, or you just want to know what's growing in your yard, it's important to know about the poisonous ones. So if you're looking for edibles, this program will better prepare you to tell the difference between the edible species and the toxic ones, and will help you enjoy the good ones that you find. Don't believe reports in the media that say experts can't tell the difference between the toxic and edible species. We can tell the difference, and with a little time and interest in identifying them, you can too. One rule to remember is that if you don't know exactly what it is not an edible mushroom. Now before we get to the field characteristics and poisonous mushrooms themselves, there's some important background information that you need to know. There are actually very few mushrooms that are deadly. This is an approximate bell curve of toxicity. On the left you have the most toxic of them, and on the right the most edible. The huge majority are somewhere in between, and of those there are many that can cause you a mild to great degree of discomfort. Considering that there are many good and easy to identify edibles, it is pointless to bother with the great majority that are too small, uncommon, or hard to identify. If you're going to hunt for edible mushrooms, stick with the easy ones. It's not worth the risk of making a mistake. For the purpose of this program, the terms toxic and poisonous will mean the same thing. However, if I say mildly toxic, I'm referring to those mushrooms that are not known to cause death, and very toxic to those mushrooms that have that potential. 4 labels that you'll see by some of the mushrooms are commonly known as edible, edible with caution, not edible and or toxic, and of course, deadly. Now let's get some of the mushroom myths out of the way. If an animal can eat it, humans can too. Not true. Some animals are able to eat mushrooms and other fungi that would be deadly to us. You can die from touching a deadly mushroom. This is false. However, it's probably a good idea to wash your hands afterward. And rarely in the past, people have gotten sick from inhaling an overabundance of spores in an enclosed area. You can tell if a mushroom is edible or toxic from its color. This is false too. However, color is one of several identifying characteristics. Fairies make fairy rings. Sorry, this is a special natural occurrence that is easily explainable. If a mushroom stains a dime green, turns silver black, or turns the rice red, it's wrong. This is not the way to determine if a mushroom is edible or not. You can cook the poisons out of mushrooms. This is only partially true. You can cook some toxins out, but some of the worst are not affected. It's different for different mushrooms, but it's recommended that you cook all mushrooms before eating them. In Eastern Europe, it is a common practice to pickle mushrooms in vinegar and salt. It's possible that this process might nullify minor amounts of toxins, and this might work for their mushrooms and not for others. The most common hospital incidents with mushrooms involve young children. These are some of the hardest cases because very young children are usually unable to convey what they ate or when they ate it. One reason it's good for parents to know more about mushrooms is that if they can identify what their toddler ate, they can be much more responsive to get help if the mushroom is a toxic one, and much less fearful about the consequences if the mushroom is a harmless one. And when parents know what mushrooms are toxic and what are not, they will be better prepared to look out for problematic fruitings in their children's play area. The same set of parameters applies to pets. Dogs are especially vulnerable because they're grazers and they often eat mushrooms if they find them. Keep in mind that some mushrooms that are mildly toxic to humans can be fatal to dogs or cats. The best way to keep your pet safe is to know and remove the toxic ones from your yard. This video will help you do just that. Those who are elderly or have compromised medical conditions should try new mushrooms with extra caution. Many potentially minor incidents were turned into major poisonings by medical factors, alcohol use, or other drug use. The number one cause of mushroom poisoning among adults is misidentification. You should never eat a mushroom based solely upon what you see in a video or read in a book. It is too easy to miss or mistake an important characteristic. Guidebooks are an excellent part of the learning process, but don't eat mushrooms just because you see them there. It is difficult to grasp the true nature of a mushroom from a photo and a description. For example, imagine a red fruit. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's green. It has a dimple and a stem at the top and has smooth skin and seeds inside. What am I talking about? A tomato. Mycologists know the difference between an agaricus and an amanita just like you know the difference between an apple and a tomato. They might be easy to confuse if you've never seen them before. This is a good demonstration why it's always best to have someone show you in the field the difference between the edible species and the toxic ones. Immigrants are especially vulnerable because the poisonous mushrooms they find here might look like the edible mushrooms from back home. This is also the case for anyone hunting mushrooms in a new geographical location. Always assume when you go to a different area that the rules have changed. Different mushrooms have different effects on different people. Some people are just allergic to them, even the ones in the store. And it's important to note that one person can eat the same mushroom in the same way and amount as another person next to them and have a completely different reaction to them. Also, there can be a cumulative effect of minor amounts of toxins. This is suspected regarding monomethylhydrazine found in raw morels and false morels like helvelas and gyromitras, as well as trace amounts in many other wild mushrooms. Monomethylhydrazine is a component of rocket fuel. It's carcinogenic, though in small amounts it evaporates quickly when cooked. For this reason, it's recommended that you don't eat any mushrooms raw. There is also a tolerance threshold with monomethylhydrazine. If you ingest up to a certain amount, it might not show any symptoms, but eating a little more than that can cause serious illness. From a medical standpoint, the main problem with using psychoactive mushrooms is not so much the intended effect on the user, but the possibility of overdose or mistakenly ingesting the wrong mushroom. This could be deadly. Occasionally, hospitals receive people who have taken too many or for some reason have gotten more than the desired effect. This can turn into an overwhelming or negative experience, though it's not likely to cause any adverse physiological damage. The generally prescribed treatment is to talk the patient down and keep them comfortable for a few hours until the effects wear off. Another problem is that psilocybes are part of the huge group we affectionately call LBMs, or little brown mushrooms. There are many LBMs that are toxic and some, gallerinas and others, that are deadly. This is the best reason not to eat anything that looks like a little brown mushroom. I will talk more about psilocybes and their lookalikes a little later. When hunting mushrooms to eat, it is a wonderful sight to find a lot of whatever you're looking for. However, eating too many mushrooms can cause another form of poisoning we call indigestion. You should always moderate your indulgence, especially if you're trying a new edible. Drinking alcohol and eating certain mushrooms does not mix. This can cause an effect similar to drugs used in anti-abuse treatments for alcoholism. I will talk about the specific mushrooms in Part 3. Don't buy or eat mushrooms that are really dirty or old. Use your same good judgment with them that you would with vegetables. Commonly in the past, bacteria or microscopic fungi have been the culprits in poisonings rather than the mushroom chosen to be consumed. Be very cautious about mushrooms that have been picked where herbicides or fungicides might have been used. Some fungi are very adept at absorbing toxic compounds, so it's recommended that you don't eat mushrooms picked near roadways or other suspicious locations. Another cause of sickness can be anxiety or fear that you've eaten the wrong thing. Learn the mushrooms before you eat them. That is the solution. Time is of the essence. If you realize that you or someone else has eaten a toxic mushroom, get medical advice and/or treatment as quickly as possible. If ingestion has been within 2 hours or so, an emetic is usually prescribed to stimulate vomiting. After 2 hours, treatment might involve more invasive medical procedures. The diagnosis of a mushroom poisoning depends greatly upon the latency, or the time elapsed from ingestion to the onset of symptoms. It is generally accepted that long latency, say over 6 hours, can mean one of the more serious types of mushroom poisoning. And some mushroom toxins take days or weeks to manifest their symptoms. North American mushroom clubs have an extensive network of volunteers that are ready to help identify a mushroom in an emergency situation. If for any reason you or someone else gets sick and has to go to the hospital, it is very important to have at least one specimen of the suspected mushroom to identify. This can be a tremendous help to the attending physician or veterinarian in the treatment of the patient or pet. It is also a good and fun idea to photograph mushrooms that you find, especially if you plan on eating them. In the next 2 sections, we'll first cover some basic mushroom identification and then the groups of toxins and the mushrooms that contain them. Whether you're looking for edibles, clearing the toxic ones out of your yard, or trying to determine what your patient ate, you'll need answers to a few basic questions. For example, does it look like a mushroom or something else? Even if it doesn't have a cap and stem and looks like an alien from outer space, it still might be a mushroom. The following will help you determine if it is, and if so, what kind it might be. There are many different characteristics that we use to tell mushrooms apart. There is color, size, habitat, fruiting season, spore color, smell, staining or bruising, and others. But one of the most important is whether a mushroom has gills, pores, teeth, or some other spore-producing surface. Here's why. Most of the mushrooms that have caps and stems have one of these structures to grow their spores on. And although potentially many mushrooms could make you sick, only a small number of those are deadly, and almost all of those have gills. It's important to note that most edible mushrooms have gills too, so we'll look at other characteristics and I'll show you how we separate the good ones from the bad. Before I get to the toxic gilled mushrooms, I want to talk a little about the mushrooms you buy in the store. The button mushrooms and portobello mushrooms are Agaricus species, and the gill color, when they are young, is usually a light pink. However, Agaricus species have chocolate brown spores, and as the mushroom matures, the spores develop and the gills turn from pink to chocolate brown. Portobellos are just a grown-up version of the button mushrooms, and that is why they have brown gills. But don't think that all brown-gilled or brown-spored mushrooms are edible. You can be confident that all commercially grown or harvested ones are fine, but for wild mushrooms, including some other Agaricus species, other means of identification are critical in telling them apart. There are no simple rules to tell if a mushroom is poisonous, but there are warning signs. One of them is if a mushroom has white gills. Once again, not all mushrooms that have white gills are poisonous, but most of the deadly mushrooms are in the genus Amanita, and they have white gills and white spores. Identifying characteristics of these Amanitas include: they have caps and stems and they don't grow on wood. They grow as single mushrooms on the ground, in the grass, or near trees. They have white gills which are not attached to the stem, and they have white spores. They also have a ring around the stem with a cup at the base. If you see these features together, the mushroom might be deadly. Remember that mushrooms are highly variable and can sometimes be missing one of these characteristics. This is an Amanita ocreata, and in this species its ring is considered evanescent, meaning disappearing, so it might or might not be there. It's still deadly. Many other mushrooms, including edible ones, have rings or cups too, but having both is an important feature when identifying toxic amanitas. There are many different pored mushrooms and many good edibles in that group. The bolete family includes Suillus, which have some good edibles, and Lexinum, and Boletus species themselves, which have some of the best edibles in the world. Some of the best of those are Boletus edulis and Boletus regius. Most of the bolete, Suillus, and Lexinums, however, are not worth eating, and some can be very toxic. A common rule about boletes is that if the pores are red and they stain or bruise blue, they are toxic. Not deadly, but toxic. Like I mentioned before, there is no reason to waste your time or your stomach on chance. There are many other kinds of pored mushrooms, but most of them are either too small to bother with or far too hard to chew. There are exceptions, though. One is Graphola frondosa, also known as hen of the woods. These are large, distinctive, and edible mushrooms if you identify them correctly. There is a similar-looking mushroom called Bonderzewia berkelei that can be mildly toxic to some people. It's also good to note that much ancient wisdom and many new discoveries about medicinal mushrooms have been about the woody, pored mushrooms we often call conchs. This is Ganoderma lucidum, and it has been part of Asian medicine for thousands of years and is now highly regarded by modern science and medicine. One helpful thing about learning the toothed mushrooms is that there are very few of them. Also, none are known to be deadly. The most commonly sought after are the hedgehogs in the Hydnum genus. They are usually light buff to cream color, they are fleshy, meaning easily cut or broken, and they don't have gills. Another choice edible are the Hericium species that are usually found on dead trees or logs. These are not coral mushrooms, which usually grow on the ground, and none are known to be poisonous. They don't have caps and stems like other mushrooms, and they are almost always white. The only other common toothed edibles are some in the Sarcodon genus known as hawkswings. Once again, they have teeth instead of gills. Many other kinds of toothed fungi that you might find are very tough and woody, and I'm sure you wouldn't want to eat them anyway. So now I've discussed mushrooms with gills, pores, and teeth. What about the something else? There are thousands of different kinds of mushrooms that have many different shapes. Some of these grow their spores right on the surface of the cap, and one of the most common of this type are the morels. Morels are one of the most sought-after mushrooms. They have a cap with convoluted ridges and pits that is clearly attached to a smooth stem. They have a single hollow chamber inside and fruit in the springtime. It's important to make the distinction between these and false morels that either have brain-like folds, saddle-shaped caps, or wavy sheets on which to grow their spores. There are also helvelas that have a fluted and multi-chambered stem and a wavy cap. These are also known to have gyromitrin, which becomes monomethylhydrazine. Like I mentioned before, this is a highly toxic substance, but ironically some people still eat certain species of helvela and gyromitra. This is not recommended. If you absolutely must go against the recommendation, boil your mushrooms very well, don't breathe the fumes because they're toxic, and throw away the water. But do not eat these. On the left is Gyromitra esculenta, and on the right is Gyromitra infula. These have enough toxicity to cause serious illness and/or death. There are also a few other false morels that come with cautions about their edibility. Those include Verpa conica, also known as thimblecaps, and Verpa bohemica. Besides the morels and their lookalikes, there are thousands of species of fungi that look like jellies, tongues, clubs, coral, and so on. You won't typically find these on lawns where young children or your pets might sample them, and they're not likely to be mistaken for any edible. However, there are some exceptions. Most puffballs, if identified correctly, are generally known to be harmless and edible, but there are some things about them to consider. You must make sure that they are not an amanita egg. If you slice it through the middle, a puffball should be pure, solid white. An amanita, on the other hand, will show the form of a young mushroom inside. Don't make a mistake on this one. It could be deadly. If they are turning yellow, brown, or black, they are beyond the edible stage or they're the wrong species. There is another genus called Scleroderma that are harder and are known to be deadly to dogs and pigs. We call them earthballs and they are not puffballs. One more thing is that the spores of some puffballs are known to cause severe allergic reactions in some people. Another beautiful group of mushrooms are the coral fungi. Although none are known to be deadly, some of them can cause severe gastrointestinal upset. These are fairly difficult to identify and none are known to be choice edible, so they are not often collected to eat. And there are some wonderful oddballs. This is a delicious edible called Spiraceus crispa. These are large with many wavy little sheets of spore-bearing surface. If you find one of these, it is best to take it to a local authority to confirm its identity. There is also what we call black trumpets or Cortinarius cornucopioides. These dry very well and can often be found packaged in your supermarket. Fortunately, it would be hard to confuse these with any deadly mushroom. Beaucoup bouquet. Another edible oddball is what they call the lobster mushroom, which is just an average russula that has been covered by another fungus. We call this particular mushroom on top of a mushroom Hypomyces lactiflorum. Once again, don't eat these without identification confirmation by an expert. And now, the aliens from outer space, the stinkhorns. They have many bizarre different shapes, and true to their name, they stink. With that overwhelming characteristic, it's not likely that any person, child, or pet would eat them. However, there are exceptions. Some people, especially in Asia, have eaten the eggs before they come out and start to stink. They are not known to be toxic unless you consider the smell a poison. Another important identification characteristic is spore color, which may differ from gill color. To determine spore color, make a spore print by putting the cap on a piece of foil or paper and covering it for a few hours. Of all the mushroom characteristics, spore color is one of the most dependable for mushroom identification. There are several types of what we call gill attachment to the stem. They range from free gills, as in the amanitas and lepiotas, to decurrent gills or ridges, as in the clitosebes, paxillus, and chanterelles. Also remember to look for rings around the stem. Many different mushrooms have them, including the deadly amanitas. In the next section, I'll cover the different groups of toxins and the mushrooms that contain them. I'll see you there. Over time, we have found out about poisonous mushrooms mostly through people who make mistakes. It is through their illness, deaths, and accounts, along with hundreds of years of research, that we've been able to identify problematic mushrooms. Now, before I get into the details, I'll give a short synopsis of 8 groups of toxic fungi. Number 1, the amanitas, gallerinas, and lepiotas whose ingestion can result in death. 2, the gyromitras, false morels, and the effects of monomethylhydrazine. 3, this is the largest group and covers various and sometimes unknown toxins that affect the gastrointestinal system but are not known to cause death. 4, Amanita muscaria, pantherina, and gemata, and the effects of muscimol poisoning. 5, the PSL syndrome group, certain clitosebe and anosebe species. 6, Coprina species and some others that cause reactions with alcohol. 7, psilocybes and related genera commonly referred to as magic mushrooms, and a miscellaneous group of deadly and toxic mushrooms and other fungi. Amanita phalloides, the death cap, accounts for 80 to 90% of the mushroom-caused deaths worldwide. So it's important that you know this one very well. It has attained the title of number one partially because many people have confused it with other mushrooms. The death cap is just one of the deadly mushrooms in the Amanita genus. The death angel, on the other hand, is probably just as toxic, but being all white and usually growing in the forest, doesn't look like any common edible. On the United States West Coast, the name death angel is given to Amanita ocreata. It is mostly white with a white to slightly buff cap. In Hawaii, they have a similar species, Amanita marmorata, which is probably deadly to humans, for which we have no statistics, but is certainly deadly to pets, for which we do. This group also includes Galerina marginata, Galerina venenata, Canosabe phalaris, Lepiota josserandii, and others. These galerinas have more poison per ounce than the deadly amanitas. Canosabe and Galerina are in that LBM group and could be confused with the psilocybes or other magic mushrooms. The spore color is ochre in Galerina and dark brown or purple brown in psilocybe. Small Lepiotas can be very attractive, but they should never be hunted to eat. Two of them, Lepiota josserandii and Lepiota helveola, are deadly and none of them are normally collected as edibles. The active toxic ingredients in this group are amatoxins and phallotoxins, with the former causing the most damage. The best chances of surviving a poisoning depends upon getting treatment as quickly as possible, along with identifying the mushroom and the offending toxin. If the species of the suspected mushroom is not known, the latency is critical to the diagnosis. However, by the time symptoms appear, the toxins have already started damaging the liver and other organs. Long recovery times and liver transplants are common if the patient is lucky enough to survive. Milk thistle extract, or silibinin, has been used in Europe for the treatment of amatoxin poisoning with debatable success. In the past, the FDA would not allow the use of silibinin without going through the long and complicated screening process. The catch-22 is this: how are you going to get someone to eat a death cap just to see if a drug works or not? So after years of European doctors possibly saving people's lives and years of deaths in America, the FDA is finally relenting and occasionally allowing its use. Many amanitas have been mistaken for edible mushrooms. Some of the mushroom pickers' target species include Agaricus species, which also have rings around the stem, but they have chocolate brown spores and they don't have a cup at the base. Rositas caparata, which has a ring but rusty brown spores and no cup at the base. Macrolepiota species, which often have large caps with distinctive decoration, a sliding ring, and no cup at the base. Macrolepiota procera and rhacodes are considered edible, but like I mentioned before, smaller lepiotas should never be picked to eat. Some lepiotas look similar to some amanitas, but they can be very toxic and sometimes deadly. Armillaria mellia is a popular edible and has a ring around the stem as well. However, armillarias often grow in cespitose groups. Amanitas never do. Armillarias grow out of wood even if they appear on the ground. Amanitas only grow on the ground. Also, armillarias have attached but slightly decurrent gills. Amanitas have free gills, meaning that they are not attached to the stem. There are a few edible green-capped russulas, but they don't have free gills, a ring around the stem, or a cup at the base. And don't forget the eggs, which look like little white puffballs when they are young. These are just a few of the lookalikes, but you can see there are many mushrooms that amateurs could confuse with amanitas. In this group, we have a situation where some people eat mushrooms that will kill other people. The culprits here are Gyromitra esculenta and Gyromitra infula. The discrepancy between those who eat them and those who get poisoned by them is a matter of your location. Gyromitras appear to be less toxic on the west coast, more toxic on the east coast, and deadly in parts of Europe. The amount you eat, frequency of ingestion, say if you have them every day for a week, personal genetics, and whether they were thoroughly cooked or not. This doesn't mean that cooking Gyromitra infula or esculenta will make them safe to eat, because it won't. There is also the possibility of misidentification by inexperienced mushroom pickers that are looking for morels. Though they both usually come out in the springtime, they are fairly easy to tell apart. As you saw in Part 2, morels have ridges and pits where the Gyromitras and Helvelas have brain-like folds or wavy saddle-shaped caps. This is Gyromitra gigas, sometimes but incorrectly called the snowbank morel, and this is Gyromitra caroliniana, called Big Red in the Midwest. Both of these have been eaten in the past, but this is not recommended. This is the largest category of toxic mushrooms. They might contain a wide variety of known or unknown toxins, but are not known to cause permanent bodily harm or death. In this group are some mushrooms that are eaten by some people, so I will feature those as well as the common lookalikes that might be confused with known edibles. Agaricus is generally known to be a safe genus, but there are some exceptions. The yellow stainer, Agaricus xanthodermis, smells of phenol and, as its name suggests, stains yellow. Agaricus preclarisquamosus smells of phenol and stains brown. Another one is Agaricus hondensis. These mushrooms need an experienced person to identify them correctly. Boletus is also known to be a relatively safe genus, but there are some exceptions. As I said in Part 2, species with red pores that stain blue should be avoided. This is Boletus pulcherimus. This, like Boletus satanus, have red pores and a very robust stature. This Chalcoporus piperatus is a small bolete and not likely to be confused with other boletes, especially if tasted. It has a very peppery snap to it. Now, what do you think these two mushrooms have in common? Well, they're both yellow, and that's a clue. These are considered lookalikes to a classic favorite, the chanterelle. These are the real thing. Chanterelles have ridges, not real gills, to grow their spores on. Notice that both chanterelles and some lookalikes have decurrent ridges or gills that run down the stem. All the chanterelles are considered edible, even the little Cantharellus cinnaberinus, if you identify them correctly. The caps of chanterelles are generally the same color as everything else, with a few exceptions. One of those, Cantharellus formosus, has a pinkish cast to the ridges. Golden chanterelles often have a fragrant aroma of apricots. There is also Cantharellus laterideus, which has a smooth, spore-bearing surface, and a white chanterelle called Cantharellus subalbidus. They generally grow singly or grouped together on the ground and never on wood, with a notable exception. Craterellus tubiformis and related species are hollow, smaller, and fruit later in the season on the ground or on dead logs. These are often called yellowfoot, and though they are not in the Cantharellus genus, they are sometimes called the winter chanterelle. One of the lookalikes to chanterelles is in the Gomphus genus. This is Gomphus flacosus, and it has ridges too, which is probably why it gets confused with chanterelles. In fact, it has been commonly but incorrectly called the woolly chanterelle. Some people eat it, but that is not recommended, as it has gotten some of those people sick. Notice the difference in color between the cap and the ridges. Also notice that Gomphus flacosus has a scaly top and is hollow like a vase. Other species in the Gomphus genus include Gomphus kaufmannii, which has larger but lighter colored scales, and Gomphus clavatus, also known as pig's ears. Another chanterelle lookalike is Hygrophilopsis aurantiaca. This has real gills, not ridges, and the stem is generally much thinner. The gills can range in color from buff to bright orange and are usually a different shade than the cap. Now, just to confuse things, the East Coast United States has some chanterelles whose ridges look almost like real gills. So it's important, like always, to check with the local mushroom authority before eating anything that you collect. Another toxic mushroom that has been confused with chanterelles is the jack-o'-lantern or Omphallotus illudens. They are usually bright orange and sometimes grow in big cespitose groups. All Omphallotus species have real gills and grow on wood. It is important to note, however, that mushrooms that have wood as their host may appear on the ground but are in some way attached to buried wood. There is also a western species of the jack-o'-lantern called Omphallotus olivescens with orange olive gills. It has been mistaken for the oyster mushroom, probably because they both grow on the sides of trees or logs. However, the oyster mushroom, Pleurotus ostriatus, has white gills and they should never be confused. All the chanterelles, Pleurotus, and most other lookalikes have decurrent gills or ridges, so you need to check other characteristics to identify them. This beauty is one of the most commonly eaten toxic mushrooms. It is closely related to the Macrolepiota genus and should be avoided just because it looks similar to some amanitas. However, it has its own toxins and can make you very ill. It probably gets confused with edible agaricus species, but as you learned earlier in the program, agaricus mushrooms have whitish or pinkish gills that turn to chocolate brown when the spores develop. Chlorophyllum, on the other hand, have white gills that turn to green or gray-green when the spores develop. Also, like many lepiotas, they have a ring that can slide up and down the stem. There are a few Macrolepiota species it could be confused with. However, Chlorophyllum molybdtes generally grows close to the ground, while Macrolepiota procera, the parasol, is much taller, and Macrolepiota rhocodes often has a very scaly cap. Avoid all species of Hebeloma. This one is Hebeloma crustuliniforme, also known as poison pie. Also avoid all species of Inocybe. Inocybe's are known as the fiber caps. I will talk more about them a little later. Hyphiloma fascicularis sometimes grow in big groups, and they are also known as the sulfur tuft. Like many mushrooms, these are variable in color and can be confused with Hyphiloma sublateridium, also known as brick caps. This is another species that should never be picked as an edible without expert help. Lactarius has some good edibles, but there are some that will give you the GI blues. This one is Lactarius torminosus, also known as the woolly milkcap. This mushroom, Letiporus sulphureus, is often sought after as an edible and is commonly known as chicken of the woods, but it gives some people the GI syndrome, so caution is advised. All small Lepiota species should be avoided, period. And remember, don't eat mushrooms raw, especially morels. When you find the real thing, make sure they're well cooked. Like I mentioned in part 2, most of the coral mushrooms are difficult to identify correctly and generally are not eaten. A few of them are Romeria botrytis, Romeria formosa, Romeria toxica, and Clavaria zollingeri. Calvacia gigantea is a real puffball and a very big one, but some people have reported ill effects from eating it. There are also a few smaller puffballs that have been reported to be mildly toxic, such as Lycoperdon marginatum and Lycoperdon subincarnatum. Earthballs are not puffballs and they are not edible. Though the inside might be white when young, it will mature to purple or black. Others that come with cautions in the GI syndrome group are Tricholoma pardinum, the tiger tricholoma, Mycena pura, Foliota squarosa, and many species of Clitocybe and Entoloma. And there are lots of beautiful russulas and a few edible ones, but Russula emetica is not one of them. With all its reputation, you'd think that Amanita muscaria would be the deadliest mushroom in the world. It is not. In fact, it has been eaten for centuries in northern Asia for spiritual and recreational purposes. With proper preparation and detoxification, it is even reported to be a good edible. Its reputation as an intoxicant has preceded its use in many other parts of the world, though the varieties in America don't appear to have the same content of active ingredients. Though chemically different than the psilocybes, they are often called magic mushrooms as well. The effects, to some degree, are similar in that they alter consciousness and might impair motor function, but often cause nausea and vomiting. Also in this group are Amanita pantherina, generally known to have a stronger toxic effect, Amanita gemata, and possibly others. The active ingredient is ibotenic acid, which the body converts to muscimol. Muscimol is also found on the skin of toads. Ibotenic acid was originally found in Amanita ibotengotaki. Both Amanita muscaria and pantherina have a wide variety of colors that they appear in. In general, the East Coast varieties of Amanita muscaria are more orange to yellow, and the West Coast versions can be bright red or yellow. Also, Amanita muscaria and Amanita pantherina can be deadly to pets. Muscarine got its name from Amanita muscaria, listed in the previous group. Ironically, Amanita muscaria doesn't have much muscarine in it, but a lot of other mushrooms do. With this confusion came a medical dilemma. Atropine is the preferred antidote for muscarine poisoning for mushrooms listed in this group. However, when confronted with the poisoning by Amanita muscaria listed in the previous group, medical personnel have misprescribed atropine, which actually adds to the symptoms instead of reducing them. Among other genera, muscarine is found in some Clitocybe and Inocybe species. These are occasionally included in that large file we call LBMs, or little brown mushrooms. They are often found in the woods and on lawns or other grassy areas. They are rarely worth the trouble to collect to eat, and they can be difficult to identify. These are more of a concern to dog owners because dogs are particularly susceptible to muscarine poisoning, and it can be fatal to them. Eating mushrooms with wine and other foods is a time-honored tradition. However, it is important to note that some mushrooms just don't mix very well with alcohol. There is what they call the antabuse effect. Certain pharmaceuticals are used to help alcoholics limit their consumption. Some mushrooms have the same effect. I am referring to Coprinus atramentarius, normally considered a good edible, and Clitocybe clavipace. Other mushrooms that might cause similar reactions include Pholiota squarosa and Pleurotus ostreatus. They can give you hot flashes, heart palpitations, headaches, and possibly nausea or vomiting, but only if you drink alcohol before or after eating the mushrooms. This sensitivity can last for days, and for this reason, this has often been misdiagnosed. Also keep in mind that adverse reactions with alcohol have happened with other mushrooms. This could potentially be the same with many that we're not aware of. Lookalikes include Coprinus comatus, also known as the shaggy mane, and other Coprinus species. Like I mentioned in part 1, ingestion of magic mushrooms is not so much a medical problem unless the person eating the mushroom has taken too large a dose, he or she has made a mistake in identification, or that person is a child. For children, they can be very dangerous and potentially deadly. Certain mushrooms or groups of mushrooms within the same species might have far more or far less active ingredients in them. So the possibility arises of the taker getting far more of a dose than expected or wanted. This factor has sent many people to the hospital. Psychoactive mushrooms have been a part of Mesoamerican culture and spirituality for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. However, hunting or possessing magic mushrooms in the U.S. is illegal and certainly not recommended. But if you're going to do it anyway, do it with someone that knows what is and what isn't the real thing. It takes an experienced person to be able to identify them correctly. Real psilocybes generally have a blue staining reaction in the stem and cap and have very dark spores. There are other, though less palatable, mushrooms that have similar effects. Some of those are in the Gymnopolis group. This one is Gymnopolis spectabilis, often called Laughing Jim. It is a very large mushroom, usually grows in groups out of trees, and has a very bitter taste. And just in case you wondered, blue staining in the boletes does not mean they're psychoactive. This is a group of mushrooms that have unique pathogens and cause isolated but sometimes serious toxic reactions. The poisonings could be rare, from another country, or related to unknown factors, but nevertheless should be noted. Amanita smithiana can give you all the GI syndrome effects plus kidney failure. The most likely lookalike here is probably Tricholoma magnivelare, also known as the American matsutake. The matsutake is a wonderful edible, but you should always have someone show you the features of a matsutake versus an amanita. One of the most important is the fragrance it produces. Matsutake smell like cinnamon, and the smell should be obvious and unmistakable. One of the distinguishing characteristics about Paxillus involutus is its enrolled margin. Also notice that these have decurrent gills and distinctive markings on the cap. This is another mushroom that has been eaten by some people. However, over time it can cause hemolytic anemia. Cortinarius is a very large group, and they're fairly easy to identify to genus in the field. As far as eating them, there is not much reason to identify them further, as the group is not known for having choice edibles. However, some species have been confused with edible mushrooms, and unfortunately, some of those are deadly. Here are the basics about corts. The name comes from cortina, or curtain-like veil that covers the gills when young. For this reason, they are called web caps. Usually the cortina is obvious, but sometimes there are only remnants on the stem and sometimes none at all. After a while of seeing many corts, you can quickly recognize the look. Cortinarius species have rusty brown spores. They can also be very beautiful, and they appear in many different colors. One of the mushrooms that has been confused with some corts is an edible called Lepis tenuta, also known as the bluet. From the top, this one might look like a similar colored species of Cortinarius. The following is a real-life example of how an experienced mushroom hunter quickly determines that the mushroom is a Cortinarius after looking at the gills and cortina.
So this is a bluet? No, it isn't. See, you never know when you look at it this way. What? Then you turn it over and your bluet turns right into a Cortinarius.
There is one recent incident of a toxic Cortinarius being eaten by a mushroom hunter because he thought it was a Chanterelle. However, this mistake should never have happened because Cortinarius don't have decurrent gills like Chanterelles. There are many toxic corts and a few deadly ones, so it's better to learn their basic characteristics and appreciate them for their beauty. Tricholoma flavivirens, or Tricholoma equestre as they call it in Europe, has been listed in guidebooks as an edible mushroom. However, a recent rash of poisonings in Europe has put it on the deadly toxic list. It can cause rhabdomyolysis, a serious disease and potential cause of kidney failure. So if you have a guidebook that lists it as edible, you might make a note of this. And the humble Crogomphus vinicolor has caused minor skin reactions in some people. As time goes, more mushrooms are being found to be toxic and or deadly, and there will be more in the future. Some of these new additions are from overseas. There was a case in Japan where people with limited kidney function died from eating Pluricybella porogens, one that we consider edible. There's a podostroma in Asia that is reported to cause skin irritation from handling it, though I've handled it and picked it several times without any problem. There is also what might be the deadliest mushroom in the world, from China, called Trogia venenata. And back in North America, the orange-capped lexinums, though not deadly, have been reported to give people problems. Some mushrooms are only toxic because they have the ability to absorb heavy metals from the substrate. Where they grow is always a consideration for whether they should or should not be eaten. Now when you hear that siren go off, let's hope it is for a much better reason, like the start of the annual morel hunting championships. The bottom line is this: we all need to respect nature. It can give life and it can take it away as well. If you are a beginning mushroom hunter, you are entering a wonderful and natural adventure. If you're a parent and or pet owner, I hope you will be better prepared to serve those that depend on you. And if you're a medical professional, I hope you will be called fewer times in the middle of the night to attend to a mushroom mishap. And one more thing, if you're just learning about mushrooms, join a local group or club. It's much more fun when you do it together. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the woods.